Support DM Belts.
Alright guys, Paul back here again for a brand new video, and I'll be honest, this is one I've been looking forward to working on for a long time. Over the past few months I've been in contact with Pete, Rich and Ollie over at Wrestletalk, and we've been collaborating and working on this brand new design for the Wrestletalk Jam That Championship. Before I show the design, I should give credit to the Wrestletalk designers. They're the ones that came up with the final design once we'd had a bit of back and forth, a few examples on my part. Once the design was finalised, it was sent to me. I cleaned up the design, made sure it was suitable for etching on a physical plate, and this is our final design. So that right there is the final Jam That Championship belt design. It's going to be a 3-plate belt. It will be finished on a black leather strap with black leather backing, and the plates will be finished in nickel and gold dual plating. There'll be a little bit of paint here and there to kind of just highlight a few of the designs, but overall I'm really excited. I think this is going to turn out to be a really beautiful belt, to be honest. I should say also, unfortunately, COVID is obviously still a thing in our everyday lives, so the belt making process in this video is not going to be able to show the etching or the initial nickel plating. I'm hoping in the new year, hopefully things improve and I'm able to take the camera into the etchers and we can show the entire process of making a belt. But until then, this video is going to show the finishing of a belt. And yeah, hopefully that will be useful for some. Hopefully it will be enjoyable to see this process. But yeah, overall, I'm very excited to complete this belt. Let me know what you think of it once we're finished. And yeah, let the guys over at Wrestletalk know what you think of the belt. Stick around, this is going to be a good one. So as mentioned, unfortunately we couldn't record the actual etching process or the nickel plating process later on, but this video does still show the majority of the belt assembly and the belt making process. So of course we start off with sanding down the plates. They've already been cut prior to the video, so they were roughly cut out, and the job there is to sand them down to smooth out the edges of the plates and make sure they're accurate to what the design is. So as you'll see, I prefer doing this by hand for most belts, using firstly a Dremel to carve out the rough shape after sanding it on the belt sander. But after that, I actually, for belts that have kind of pointed or angles such as this one, I like filing it by hand. It makes it allows me to create a more accurate shape, and it lets me kind of work on the belt by hand and make sure that all the angles are how I want them. So of course we start off with the files, and then we sand it down with high grit sandpaper, moving our way up to make it smoother. From there, the plates need curved, so we take them to the plate roller, and as you'll notice on the side plates, we do have a center line drawn up. That's simply because these are circular side plates, so putting them through a roller, you'll never be sure if the angle is correct, if you've got it lined up perfectly, because the plates are completely circular. So it was necessary to draw the straight line. That is also why I curved them using a cutting board as well, a lined cutting board. That allows me to line up the plates with the lines on the cutting board to make sure I've got an even curve. It's very easy to misposition the plates when curving them, and that will result in a miscurved plate. It will be a squint curve, it will be leaning one way or the other. The plates all require several passes through the plate roller at differing degrees to increase the curve with each pass. As you'll see, both the side plates are curved identically to one another. And we move on to the center plate. The center plate is actually the easiest of the 3 plates to curve accurately. This is because, of course, it's not a circular plate, so the odd shape kind of makes it a little bit easier to accurately curve it through the roller. And as you'll see, it does require several passes to make sure that it's curved accurately and it's got a deep enough curve. On this belt, it's a slightly smaller belt than maybe big heavyweight belts, so it doesn't have the ridiculous curve you'll see in some, but we do leave it with a decent enough curve. The next step after curving the plates is to actually weld the bolts onto the rear of the belt. So as you'll see, I've marked out where I would be welding the bolts on, and it's straight onto our welding machine. So This is my preferred method of welding. There's several different ways this can be done, but I prefer the efficient welding of these studs as opposed to any other kind of welding. This creates the least damage on the front. In fact, there is no damage using this method of welding to the front of the plate. As you'll see on the back, there are some scorched marks on the rear of it and a little bit of plating splatter. This is simply because of the heat used when welding. These are cleaned off immediately and they don't affect the strength of the weld or the look of the plate at all. At this point, once the plates are welded, it's time to send them off to the platers. So as mentioned at the start of the video, unfortunately I wasn't able to take the camera into the platers, but from this point the plates get polished and nickel plated. So while the plates are away getting polished and nickel plated, this is when I start work on the leather strap. So as you'll see, I work off of a template I created on the computer based off of the shape and length of the plates. We trace around this onto the leather strap to make sure it's an accurate cut to the strap. I straighten this all up using my straight edge, as you'll see there. And from there, it's time to start the tooling. So we simply wet the leather strap to make sure the leather will take all of our impressions, all of our stamping work. And we impress the Wrestletalk custom plates. So this features the jam jar on the right hand side as well as the Wrestletalk logo in both ends of the strap. From there we cut the rough shape of the majority of the strap to make sure it is lined up perfectly with the plates. This is simply done using a box cutter knife. There's a lot of leather tools you can use. There's proper leather knives. I've got many of them, but my preferred method is always just simply to use a box cutter. We line out the tooling lines for where we're going to be putting a border to the leather. And then it's time for the tooling. So as mentioned, this is probably the lengthiest single process of making an entire belt, but of course that depends on the intricacy and the detail required in the leather work. The leather for the Jam That Championship is pretty detailed. It's got a lot of designs to it. It's got a lot of lines needing tooled, so every line designed into the strap is tooled both ways by myself by hand, as you can see here. So we copy around all the lines, we border the jam jar itself. This allows the stamped details to stand out a little bit more and it gives the leather strap a lot more depth. We tool around the entirety of the strap, including the border around the plates, and we make our way to the other snap box. As mentioned before, the tooling process on the leather is an incredibly lengthy one. As you can see here, we're tooling the border to the central point of the strap. The entirety of the tooling from the time I started working on the leather to the end of it was about 5 to 6 hours that day. So it's a pretty long time to be sitting in one spot hammering leather. On the ends of the strap, I stamped down and gave a bit of a texture to the areas around the Wrestletalk lettering. This allowed the lettering itself to stand out a lot more, as well as just creating a little bit of different areas that will catch the light when the strap is fully finished. Personally, I like adding in a bit of tooling like this. It leaves the strap looking a little bit less blank and a little bit more detailed. I stamp my signature into the left-hand end of the strap, as I do with most belts. This is somewhat hidden inside of that textured tooling that you can see the Wrestletalk logo stands out a lot more against. After this, we cut out the remainder of the snapbox areas to make sure it is a straight line snapbox, to make sure that nothing has warped, nothing has gone awry. Once the tooling on the strap is complete, the next step is to bevel the edges of the leather strap itself. So this involves our edge beveling tool. It's a simple method of shaving off a corner of the leather strap itself. This makes the strap a little more comfortable to hold and it stops the edges of the strap creasing so much as opposed to if it was left as a straight edge. Now that the strap is fully tooled, the next step is to oil the strap. This is a pre-dye method that I prefer to use. This strengthens the leather itself as well as enriching it again and adding back a lot of the moisture that would have been lost after the strap has been tooled and has been left to dry. After a few days of the oil setting in, it's ready to dye the strap. So this strap's being finished in a simple traditional black leather strap. Personally, I prefer black most of all out of any other strap colour. It's the colour that will last the longest, and it will show up the least amount of damage if the belt's being used, especially in ring. Once the belt has been dyed, it's time to varnish it. So this is a simple passive leather varnish. We do a few coats of this over a few days and it gives it that nice sheen, kind of shiny look, and in addition to the look, it makes the strap a lot stronger and a lot more durable. Once the top coat varnish has had a few days to soak in and dry fully, it's time to start completing the edges of the strap. So for this we use a simple wooden edge slicker. This is all done by hand, and we use a product known as gum trag to assist in the smoothing and sealing process. Now that the strap is finished, conveniently the plates are now back from being polished and nickel plated, and it is time to start the gold plating. So this is a process known as dual plating on belts. It's the effect of gold and nickel plating on the same plates. It's a lengthy process, just like the leather work, but in this case it was very much worth it. So the initial stage of doing this requires masking off all the areas of the plate which will be remaining in the nickel silver colouring. So as you can see, a simple process of masking up the plates with blue masking tape and then having to cut away all the areas that are going to be changed into gold from nickel. The Wrestletalk belt in particular has a dotted border pattern around the two side plates. For this I simply put circular stickers over the dots that will be remaining in nickel. This allows the areas to be covered up and protected from the gold plating that will be applied shortly. You can see initially the border of the plate, which will be remaining silver, was covered up first, and then the two banners, including the Jam That Championship banner at the top and the Wrestletalk logo banner at the bottom. This belt does feature a lot of nickel areas backed up with gold, so you can see the amount of masking around the edge and the side of the center plate was very intricate and it was very detailed. This process in total took about 4 hours to mask and cut away the excess masking. Some people might be a bit paranoid that I am working on the plate with a box cutter knife. Don't worry, the only places that the box cutter is cutting are areas in which the paint will be in afterwards. So it's never going to come into contact with bare areas of plating. We simply cut away the areas that are going to be painted through and that need gold plating. Now that the entirety of the areas on the plates that are to remain silver have been masked off, it's time to actually start the gold plating. Now this is done in a process known as brush plating. This is an electroplating method in which the gold colouring, or any other colour but in this case gold, will be brushed onto the plate. So there's a few steps to this. The first step is to activate the plates, which is done using the liquid I'm pouring into the jar now. This is known as an activating liquid. It does exactly what it says. It activates the plate and readies it to be gold plated. The gold plating, it might surprise some, when it comes in its solution form, actually comes as a pinkish purple colour, as you'll see. So in this purple liquid there are microscopic gold fragments which then electronically fuse to the metal plates. As you can see here, we have to connect the side plate by the bottom screws to get an electrical charge inside. As I've said for several parts of this already, this is also a pretty lengthy process. So we have to carefully brush over the areas that will be turning into gold and make sure that we don't accidentally start activating any areas that are to be left nickel. The masking does help with that, but we have to be careful during the process all the same. As you'll see here slowly, now that we're plating on the gold, the nickel areas that are left exposed will slowly start to turn gold as we brush over them. As you'll see, the gold colour starts to really come to life the further along you get, and it's especially obvious when you remove the masking tape and can see the remaining silver underneath. Personally, dual plated in nickel and gold is my favourite colour scheme for any championship belt, and hopefully you can see the detailed areas of gold and nickel showing up in the side plate. And now we move on to the centre plate, which, as I've already said, was a ball ache. And the gold plating was no different, so we have to be very careful when plating this. You have to carefully go over the areas. This is the initial stage of activating the plates, so as mentioned, this clears up any grease, any dirt that's on the plates and makes it ready for the gold plating. And as you can see here from the Jam That Jam areas at first, the gold is slowly going on. It is a very interesting process to see happen in front of you as the silver turns to gold by brushing on a purple liquid, but it is what it is. It might look a bit strange to some initially, but this is how it's done. It's not immediately obvious how much of a difference the gold makes, but as mentioned already, once you start taking the masking tape off, you really start to see the change. The contrast between the nickel against the gold is quite beautiful, and it is, as mentioned, my favourite colour scheme for any championship belt. Like I said, the sides of the centre plate were the most difficult parts. Those floral areas in nickel on that gold background was very difficult to do, but the end result is absolutely fantastic. Once the gold plating is done, it's important to polish the plates a little bit. This is done using a microfiber cloth, similar to what you would use on glasses. This stops the plates from getting scratched and just clears up any blemishes or any remaining solution that was left on it. As you can see, the shine from the plates is absolutely fantastic. The sparkle of the gold against the nickel is beautiful, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out. So now that the plating is done, the next step is to complete the black paint on this belt. So the black paint is usually done before any of the other colours, especially when it's such a heavy black paint belt like this one. The majority of the paint on this belt is actually black, so it might look a bit messy to begin with, but we simply infill all the areas that will need the black paint first. We spread it around. This is actually done using a cocktail stick or a toothpick, simply because a paintbrush is too big to fit in some of the intricate areas. So you infill the areas and then you clean off the excess afterwards. The same is done on the centre plate, all the black areas filled in before any of the other colours, and then simply cleaned off the excess. Next up, we glue in the cubic zirconia stones. This belt only features 4 of them, and that is 2 on each side plate, so there's not a lot of stones to complete on this belt, but those little additions to the side plates kind of give it a nice pop and a little additional detail and sparkle. So I always enjoy including cubic zirconias on any belt, especially when it's a little bit more of a subtle addition like it is on this belt. From there, it's time to put the plates onto the strap. So I do this using another template designed on the computer. We mark out all the spots where the bolts were welded onto the plates, and we transfer that onto the leather strap itself. Those holes are all punched by hand, and the plates are simply attached in place using those holes as guidelines. The plates themselves attach to the strap simply using M5 hex nuts. So these correlate to the studs we welded on earlier on. The 2 studs on the side of the center plate each have washers included with them. This is to make sure that the area of the strap that will be taking the most damage, the most kind of wear and tear, will be protected from ripping through. As the plates go on, you start to get a real impression of how this belt will really look, and to be honest, I was really enjoying it at this point. So this process is done using the Dremel again. We simply use a small cutting disc, we cut off the remainder of the excess bolt, and once these are all cut off, we simply shave over and round the bolts to create a nicer effect through the backing. It stops the hex nut showing up too much of a shape through the back. We tighten the bolts throughout as the dremeling can start to loosen them. This was a very messy part of the belt, so it's important to vacuum up any of the excess dust, the metal fibres, clean up the workshop after this. Once everything's clean and we're back to work, we punch the holes for the male snaps on the left hand side of the snap box. So this belt is going to feature a 2x8 male snap box and a 2x5 female snap box. So and then the snaps are all pressed in place. There's a few methods to do this, a few of them involve hammering in place by hand. Personally, I don't like those methods and I prefer to use a professional press. This creates a perfectly even pressed snap and it makes the snaps a lot less likely to rip out of place, which unfortunately is very common with the hand set-in tools. So now the strap is ready to get its backing leather glued in place. So this is simply attached using a contact cement. This is spread onto both the backing leather and the front part of the leather itself that it's going to be glued to. We simply brush this in place on both sides of the leather. And while not entirely necessary, I prefer to use a heat gun to dry and tackify the glue a little bit more. In my opinion, this allows the glue to be a bit stickier and hold a little bit stronger, as well as drying quicker to allow me to complete the backing quicker. So as you'll see, the nice smooth leather backing is simply glued into place. We heat gun it again and then we attach the two sections together to create a beautiful finish on the rear of the belt. You can see all the bolts from the hex nut showing through. Personally, that's one of my favourite parts of real belts, is seeing all the bolts sticking through the back of the leather. I think it's a really nice kind of effect. The next day, once the backing has fully glued on, we cut off the excess away from the belt, and then it's time for the female snaps to be added. So just like the other side, we have to hand punch the holes. Again, this is a 2x5 snap box on this side. After that, I check that all the snaps fasten together as they should, and no surprise, they do. At this stage, we paint in the rest of the colours. Thankfully on this belt, there's very few areas that aren't painted in black. It's simply the Wrestletalk logos themselves and the jam jar. So we start off with the white paint. Again, this paint is done with a toothpick simply because it's such a small area of paint that it's easy to get it accurate. And of course, we finish lastly with the Jam That jam jar on the centre plate. So I do enjoy this being sort of the focal piece of the belt. It's unique to say the least. I think it is the first belt I've ever seen to feature a jam jar as the centerpiece, and yeah, it'll probably be the last. We're not finished just yet, there's still a few things left to do. That mainly being the edges of the belt. So first off, we seal the edges. This is a method that stops the backing leather from peeling away from the front, which for ring used belts can happen over time. And then we use our edge coat paint to complete that seal. And the last thing we've got left to do on this belt is the custom belt bag. So we cut out the design on our CNC vinyl cutter. We peel away the excess vinyl to reveal my logo as well as the support Wrestletalk lettering. This design itself is then heat pressed onto the belt bag itself, which results in a pretty cool final product, if I may say so. So I thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of this belt. Let's take a proper look.
Yo, monkeys, it's me, DDP. And if you want to get one of the greatest belts made for you, go to Paulmartinbelts. That's right, sucker.